Okay, Skyler, my name's Alora. I just wanted to make this formal introduction a little bit more. Can you just give me like a brief formal introduction of who you are, what you're running for, and just tell me a brief summary of what you plan to do?
Hi, Laura. I'm Skyler Johnson, running for New York State Senate on the Democratic Party line. I'm seeking the Democratic nomination. I'm running on a number of key issues and a number of policy points like healthcare, housing, and the environment. They're all issues that are critical to New York, and I'm really looking forward to fighting for them in Albany.
That's really interesting to like hear. I think that just hearing you as a young person, like you're only 19 years old, and just putting down all those key issues that we need to probably implement in the state is very important. I want to go back to you being only 19 years old. Does that kind of scare you a little bit? Because I know the people that you're running against are fairly a little bit older than you, and you don't have as much experience as them. But how do you think that your age can benefit in your favor when running for Senate?
Absolutely. So yes, my opponents are older than me. However, I always challenge the experience argument to an extent, because here's what I'll ask you. How much experience do any of them having being a senator? How much experience do they have in Albany? None of them have any for any real practical experience here. Every time you get a government job, anytime you're in an elected position, it's new. It doesn't matter if you were in the council or the school board. It's different from the job you were previously at. My age is actually an asset here because it allows me to connect with voters across the island, but also nationwide. I've been connecting with young people across the nation, a lot of whom have been inspired to either run or to get involved because they learned about my campaign. So my age really allows me a unique angle to connect with voters, but also to get more people involved in politics. Out here, it means that I can get more people registered to vote, it means I can get more people volunteering for my campaign, and it means we can win the nomination and eventually the general in November.
So you mentioned that no one has been a Senate, of course. How does it feel knowing that you're not running against the past incumbent?
Now, it's nice not running an incumbent race because it gives everyone the ability to look at the candidates for who they are outside of who's already been in that seat. Because when someone's in the seat, it unfortunately skews in their favor because people know their name, people have gotten used to voting for them, things like that. Unfortunately, because Senator Laval had name recognition since the 70s, a lot of times people would vote for him regardless of what he believed in, just because they knew his name or knew his family. So now we have a slate of people that, even though we all have our own pockets of name recognition, we're all, for the most part, establishing a new record out here. And it's really great to run in a race like that because it means that, for the most part, we can fight on the issues, not just on name recognition.
How do you think that this election will differ with the incoming new young voters, especially in our generation?
So in this election, I expect to see more young people voting than ever, and there's a couple reasons for that. I wish I could take all the credit for that. I believe that we will see some young voters coming in because of my candidacy, partially because we've registered them or they've registered to vote to make sure they could vote for me in June and in November. However, with the COVID virus so prevalent, every voter in New York State that was eligible for this election was mailed an absentee ballot application. There's already been tens of thousands of them requested throughout the district, which means that we're going to see an increase in voters, especially young voters, turning out to vote. And that's what we need. I've already had people reach out to me who are voting for the first time to let me know that they just filled in their absentee ballot and mailed it back for me. So I believe that with everything going on in the nation, we're going to see an increase in youth turnout. The other thing that's taking place is because of George Floyd murder, because there's such widespread unrest and such widespread unease amongst the general public, young people are turning out. I organized a rally in Port Jefferson to speak against racial injustice, and we had hundreds of young people there. And almost all of them were registered to vote, and almost all of them will be voting. And that's what we're seeing. Young people are really ready to take up the mantle and to move on in the United States.
You were just talking about George Floyd and the rally and the protest that you were a part of. How did you feel when you saw the video itself, though? Because I know that you are both white and black. What was your reaction to the video?
I was devastated. Of course, it hits very personal for me, but I wasn't surprised. It wasn't a shock. No, I didn't turn on the news and see man killed in Minneapolis and go, "What? I never thought this could happen." It's something that has become something to expect. An unarmed black man killed, a woman killed while in her home, things like that. We expect to see these headlines because they've become the reality for Black America. So it was not shocking to me, it was upsetting, and it was deeply disturbing. So that's part of the reason I organized a rally. I got a whole bunch of people together in Port Jeff, and we had nearly 1,000 people turn out because people across the island, white and black, and any other skin color, any other background, are very angry and they're very upset and they're ready for change.
Going into that, what do you think about the surge of young activists taking charge into this movement itself?
Well, it's exactly what we need. So the problem is that a lot of times young people don't get involved in politics, partially because they're spoken down to. Because every time young people don't vote, older generations get mad and say young people don't care. They don't want anything to do with it. They just don't care. And then as soon as young people get involved, they're told, "What do you know? Why are you doing this? Wait till you're older. Get your education." They're always told some demeaning. There's always some demeaning response to it to try to prevent them from actually getting involved or from actually joining the movement. Young people are not taking that anymore because young people are tired. Young people people my age were born into a world where they were told, "Hey, all you got to do is get good grades, graduate high school, go to college, get a degree, get a good job, and you'll have a happy life." Then the economic crisis hit, and everything flipped on its head again. And I've said that a couple times, but we've seen a lot of turmoil just in the last in my not even 20 years of life. Things keep changing. When I was 1 year old, it was 9/11. Then it was the recession. Every time a sense of normality is established, it's broken, and it changes the way that we're perceiving the world. Young people have seen the older generations cause problems here, and we're ready for change. We're ready for things to be different here. We're also ready to work with those generations for the first time and actually start to bridge that gap, so that way we're building worlds that are meant for everyone. Long Island is awfully expensive. It's economically impossible to live on, and that's not just for young people. A lot of senior citizens are leaving the island because they can't afford it here anymore. So of course young people are getting involved in both movements when it comes to Black Lives Matter, but also general political movements because they're tired and they're frustrated.
How do you think that you can speak and reach out to older voters, though?
For example, I'm very supportive of the New York Health Act, which will give everybody in New York health care. A lot of older voters are very worried about their health care, either for them or their families, and I don't blame them. We live in a country or a state where, in the middle of a health crisis, the governor decides it's time to cut Medicare and Medicaid. They're worried that at one point they're going to go to their doctor, and the doctor's going to say, "I'm sorry, that treatment's not covered." Or they're worried that their kids or their grandkids are going to get kicked off their insurance at the age of 26 and are not going to be able to get another job and are going to end up in a crisis because they cannot afford the cost of medical bills. So these issues resonate with older voters and older constituents because they're so important and they're things that are affecting their day-to-day lives.
I did want to also go over your plans for the economy and small businesses and also education, especially post-COVID, as we are in a very bad decline, especially going into the economy. So how are you going to fight these battles and really help get us where we need to be again?
So I'm glad that you brought up small businesses and education in a similar vein because they're very connected. So the redlining policies of the New Deal helped to establish the segregation that we see throughout the United States. We live in Suffolk County, one of the most segregated places in New York. It's one of the top 10 most segregated counties in the United States. That when lines were drawn for any type of development or zoning, they were always drawn around Black and other minority communities to make sure the minority communities couldn't advance. So if, let's say, a bank was deciding who would be approved for loans, any communities that had minority groups in it would be drawn around for the not approved loans. The white communities would be approved, and it was designed that way intentionally. It meant when businesses wanted to come in, they would need to go to the white area. When schools were designed, the better schools would always be in the white areas, and we still see that today. Now, small businesses, it's frustrating because in New York we have a tendency to place an emphasis on big corporations over small businesses. It's something that we see nationwide, but I believe it's very prevalent here. Part of the problem is that we have this myth that we've been convinced of, partially by corporations, that if we don't give them tax breaks, they're going to leave. We're in New York. We're in one of the financial capitals of the world. They're not going to leave. They want to stay in New York. If we stop giving tax breaks to corporations, if we stop rewarding big business for bad behaviors and for underpaying employees, we can give those tax breaks to small businesses and allow them to thrive. We can help subsidize things like paying people a living wage, getting benefits, making sure that businesses survive. Now, education is another key component of this. Our education system is inherently flawed because well, actually, I'm going to change that. It's not flawed. It's working the way it's designed. I've been saying that a lot recently about a number of different systems. The education system is not designed to provide a fair education to everyone. We do not have a fair and equitable education system in New York. What we need to do is stop taxing based on property tax. Your quality of education should not be decided based on whether you live in this zip code or this zip code, because it means that you're always going to have unfair education. What we need to do is tax across New York State and tax based on wealth, tax based on income. We have over 120 billionaires in New York State. Can you imagine if they were paying just a little bit more into the education system, what we can do to fund those programs to make sure that students are not having textbooks that were written in the 90s, that our technology isn't falling apart? This was highlighted by the COVID crisis when some students were able to transition into online learning because they have a couple of devices. So they're on one computer, their brother's on a tablet, their sister's on the laptop, and they're all able to work separately and have quality education, or at least be able to connect with the class. Meanwhile, some of their counterparts have zero technology or are working on a parent's old phone to try to stay afloat. And then when their parents are at work, they can no longer connect to the class because they have no more access to technology. I held a forum on the issue of housing. However, we went into these issues too, and one of my guests was a teacher. She has a student who she couldn't get a hold of once this all started, and she later found out it's because he had been forced to move into a motel and had no Wi-Fi or cellular service anymore. That's the inequities that we're seeing in New York State. So my plan would help to fix the education system, and it would mean that poor communities are able to get the same education, same quality education as rich communities. It would benefit everyone, and it would save the average person money.
It's interesting that you brought up the idea of redlining, because that's something that you don't really hear that much from people, because it's something that really fades away, something that people get uncomfortable with even talking about, especially when going into race. How do you think that you really implementing that conversation regarding race really differentiates you from you and your opponents?
So one of my opponents is really great on this topic as well. She's the only other minority candidate in the race. The other candidates, not so much. They took way too long to say anything about the George Floyd murder. One of them, unfortunately, in her statement, actually had the sentence relating to rioting. It does nothing to help the African American community. She's a white candidate that thought it was acceptable to speak on behalf of black people, and it's not acceptable. They're not willing to have those hard conversations, and I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that in them. I'm not okay with that in any other candidates. Now, let me be clear. I don't subscribe to negative messaging. I don't subscribe to negative campaigning. However, I see something wrong, I'm going to call it out. And this is something that I need to call them out on, because they have done an awful job when it comes to this topic. I haven't seen them at protests. I haven't seen them speaking up. I haven't seen them doing anything substantive to actually help the communities. Instead, they've tried to further their own gains, and they've made a bigger effort making sure that the police aren't mad at them when they say these statements than making sure that the black communities are okay. We need to be able to have these uncomfortable conversations. If race is an uncomfortable conversation for you, you've probably been privileged enough for it to be an uncomfortable conversation for you. So we need to be bringing these conversations into the fold, make sure we're discussing with everybody. We're raising a new generation of children that are going to be born into a much different world than the ones before them. People who are born in the year 2015 are not going to be born into the same world as the ones who were born into 2000, the ones who were born into 1985, and so on, so on. The conversation is going to be different. Consider what happened in the mid-2010s. Gay marriage was legalized in the United States. Today's children are going to be born into a world where they've never even really heard of the argument that marriage should be between a man and a woman. These conversations are going to change over time, and they're going to become easier to have in some ways, but they're going to become harder to have in some ways.
Why are you so passionate going in on the environment? Is it because of your own beliefs? Of course it is, but is it also because there's a lot of young people that are also very much passionate in this and you're really speaking to them?
My platforms are not designed based on what I think is popular. My plans are formulated based on what's right. The climate change is not just a clear and present threat, it's the clear and present threat. It's going to be the single greatest issue that's going to affect the United States, and it already is. We live on an island. We're currently sitting in Sag Harbor, New York. Can you imagine what happens if sea level rise starts to go up 12 feet? If, even if it goes up a foot, can you imagine the damage it's going to do to this neighborhood, to this area? We've seen a lot of resistance from the people out in the island who live in mansions, who live on waterfront properties, because a lot of times the climate proposals, they'll see the effects of it. They'll see, the wires for wind energy running through their neighborhoods. They'll see things built on the water. What they don't realize is that if we don't do this, in 20 years they're not going to have homes. Those homes are going to become inhabitable. Dune Road is a perfect example of this, where the homes are being forced to be moved back to prevent them from being underwater. They're flooding whenever there's a storm. That's the danger that we're in. We need to mitigate the effects of climate change now. We're too late to stop it at this point. And right now we have a federal administration that has no problem rolling back climate change measures. So no, it's time to fight climate change. It's time to protect our environment. We also do not have good drinking water in New York State. I live in Brookhaven. At one point, it was estimated that 70% of our wells had a known carcinogen in them. Out in Southampton, I spoke to a gentleman who will not use the water supply in his house because every time his white towels touch them, it turns gray. That's what we're dealing with. So these environmental policies are a public health crisis, and that's why I'm fighting for them so hard. It's why I'm pledging to be a climate activist in New York State government.
How can people reach out to you and find you and know who you are?
My website is Skyler, Skyler, for Senate.com. However, I own domains for the AR spelling too. You make a mistake, you still find me. If you go to my website, you can read more about my comprehensive plans on the issues we've discussed as well as the ones we haven't. But you can also go on my Facebook, on my Twitter, Instagram, or even on TikTok. It's all Skyler for Senate. So if you find any of those, you'll be able to learn more about me and follow my journey, especially up to the primary and to the general election in November.
Well, Skyler, thank you so much for sharing your time with me and for having this conversation with me. I think this went really well, and I am excited to see what the future holds for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me here.
This is Laura Lagarde reporting for Hampton's Mouthpiece.